The red sun of Varnus hung low in the dusty sky, casting a pale light across the broken land. Once this place was filled with green fields and shining rivers, but now only ash and metal remained. The long war between the living and the mechanical swarm had turned every world in the region into a wasteland. Among the many armies that fought here, there was one strange alliance: humans and Kareth. The Kareth were tall, blue-skinned beings with calm minds and advanced machines. They saw themselves as thinkers and strategists. The humans were fewer in number but were known for their courage and strange ability to fight, long after logic said they should have fallen. In the middle of that shattered land stood a man named Ryan, a human soldier wrapped in heavy armor scratched from 100 battles. He had led his squad through fire and chaos more times than anyone could count. Near him stood Commander Lyra, a Kareth officer known for her sharp mind and strict discipline. She respected Ryan once. She had fought beside him, trusted his instincts, and even called him a friend. But war changes hearts, and exhaustion changes respect into doubt. That morning before the battle began, Ryan had looked across the horizon and seen the dark line of the swarm moving like a tide of black metal. He had seen it before, but it never failed to make his chest feel heavy. The swarm did not hate. It did not feel. It only consumed. The Kareth soldiers beside him adjusted their energy rifles and waited for orders. "Commander," Ryan said quietly through his helmet, "if they break the front line, we won't have time to fall back." Lyra looked at him with her cold silver eyes. "We hold the line. We do not run," she replied. Ryan gave a small nod. "Then we make them pay for every inch." When the swarm came, it was like a storm. Machines crawled and flew in endless waves, their red eyes burning through the smoke. The ground shook with each impact. Ryan's armor glowed with blue energy as he moved forward, taking the heaviest position at the center. His weapon fired bursts of plasma, cutting through the metal bodies. Around him, soldiers shouted orders and explosions filled the air. Hours passed like minutes. The Kareth line began to break. The left flank fell and the swarm poured in. Lyra's communication lines filled with reports of fallen soldiers. She saw Ryan still standing in the center, holding the line alone after most of his squad was gone. He shouted through the comms for the others to retreat. He was covering their escape. "Ryan, pull back now," Lyra ordered. "You will be surrounded." "Not yet," his voice came back, strained but calm. "I can give you one more minute." She wanted to argue, but she saw through her visor that he was right. Every second he held them back allowed dozens of soldiers to escape the encirclement. Ryan threw grenades, fired his rifle until it overheated, and when his ammo was gone, he used his armor's energy field to crush anything that came close. Finally, the human fleet above sent down support fire, clearing the swarm. The ground burned with light and the machines pulled back. The battlefield went quiet except for the wind and the sound of broken machines cooling in the dust. When it was finally over, the survivors began to return to camp. Medics carried the wounded. The air smelled of smoke and metal. Ryan walked back slowly, his armor scorched and dented. He had saved nearly 100 soldiers, including part of Lyra's squad. But when he entered the command tent, he did not find thanks. He found silence and cold eyes. Lyra stood near the strategy table. Her voice was low, controlled, but every word struck harder than any bullet. "Do you realize what you've done, human?" she said. Ryan paused. "I did what had to be done. I kept your people alive." She turned sharply. "At the cost of disobeying direct command. You risked everything for your own idea of heroism. You could have destroyed the entire line. Do you think your bravery excuses that?" Ryan's jaw tightened. He did not reply. He looked around. The other officers said nothing. Some looked away. Others stared at him as if he were a problem, not a savior. Lyra continued, her voice colder now. "Humans are all the same. You think courage makes you special. You fight because you want to be seen. You crave danger as if it gives your life meaning. You do not understand discipline. You only know chaos." The tent fell silent. The words echoed. Ryan felt something heavy sink in his chest. He wanted to explain that it was not pride that made him fight, but duty. That he had seen too many people die, and he could not stand still while others fell. But the words would not come. He simply looked at her, then at his armor. For years it had protected him. It had carried the marks of every battle, the blood of every victory. Slowly Ryan reached up and unlatched the locks. The armor hissed open. He lifted the helmet from his head, revealing a face lined with dust and pain. Without a word, he unstrapped each piece, chest plate, shoulder guards, gauntlets, and laid them down on the ground. The metallic sound of each piece echoed through the camp. The other soldiers watched, silent and unsure what to say. Lyra frowned. "What are you doing?" Ryan stood there for a moment, looking down at the armor that had once made him feel unstoppable. "You said humans fight for attention," he said softly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I've been fighting for too long to remember why." He took the insignia of his unit, a small patch with a faded Earth symbol, and placed it on top of the armor. Then he turned toward the desert outside the camp. The horizon was still glowing from the fires of battle. "I'm done," he said quietly. Before anyone could stop him, he walked out into the open plains. The hot wind blew against him, carrying sand across the empty battlefield. His steps were heavy but sure. He did not look back. Lyra stood still, watching him go. Part of her wanted to call out, to stop him, to take back her words. But pride held her tongue. She convinced herself that it was better this way, that soldiers like him would only bring more loss. Yet as his figure disappeared into the red dust, something inside her chest twisted. That night the camp was unusually quiet. The Kareth soldiers sat by their machines, whispering about the human who had walked away. Some said he would not survive the desert. Others said humans had a strange will to live, that maybe he would find a way. Lyra sat alone in her command tent. She replayed her own words in her mind, and each time they sounded harsher. She remembered how Ryan had stood beside her in the early days when the alliance was new. He had saved her more than once. He had trusted her when no one else did. She tried to tell herself that it was necessary to discipline him, that he had risked too much. But deep down, she knew it was not discipline that guided her anger. It was fear. Fear of losing more people. Fear of watching another friend fall. And instead of showing that fear, she had buried it under sharp words. Outside, the night wind moved across the desert, lifting small waves of sand. Far away, Ryan kept walking under the twin moons. The battlefield behind him faded into the distance. His steps carried no direction, only distance from what he had left behind. For the first time in years, he felt no weight on his shoulders. But he also felt no purpose. He was free yet empty. The war had taken everything, even his reason for fighting. He looked up at the stars, cold, bright, and endless. Somewhere among them was Earth, a place he had not seen since childhood. He wondered if anyone there still remembered the soldiers sent across the stars. As he walked, a small storm began to form on the horizon. Lightning flashed across the dusty clouds. Ryan pulled his jacket tighter and kept moving one step at a time. He did not know where he was going. He only knew he could not go back. Behind him in the silent camp, Lyra looked toward the same horizon and whispered words no one heard. "Be safe, human," she said softly. The desert swallowed her voice, and the night carried it away. The sun rose slowly over the endless desert of Varnis. The ground shimmered with heat, and the air carried the faint smell of burning metal from the distant war zones. Ryan walked alone, leaving footprints in the soft sand. Each step was heavy, and each breath burned in his throat. His armor had been more than protection. It had been a part of him, his second skin, his identity as a soldier. Now without it, he felt exposed and human in every way. He had no weapon except a small knife and a half-empty canteen. His supplies were low and his energy even lower. Yet he kept walking. His mind drifted to the words Lyra had spoken, the way her voice had cut through him like a cold blade. "You humans fight because you want to be seen," she had said. He tried to forget it, but the memory stayed. He had fought for years not to be seen, but because no one else would stand when things turned hopeless. He had fought to protect, not to be praised. But maybe she could never understand that. By the second day, the desert grew harsher. The wind turned strong and dry, throwing sand into his eyes. Ryan found a rocky area and took shelter under a broken metal structure, an old outpost from the first days of the war. Its walls were rusted and cracked, but it offered some shade. He searched through the wreckage and found old supply boxes covered in dust. Most were empty, but one contained dried food packs and a small solar battery. He smiled faintly. "Looks like someone still likes me," he muttered to himself. After eating, he explored deeper inside the outpost. It was silent except for the faint hum of a damaged power line. On one wall he saw faded writing in English, words left by human engineers long ago. "We came not to conquer but to build." He stood there, staring at the sentence for a long time. It reminded him of the old human mission that had brought them to this world, not to fight, but to help the Carath rebuild their colonies after the first swarm war. Humans had come as allies, not soldiers. Somewhere along the way, the meaning had been lost. Inside a control room, he found a broken transmitter. The screen flickered weakly when he connected the solar battery. He began repairing it using the tools he found in a locker. The process was slow and tiring, but it gave him something to focus on. Hours turned into days. Each night, Ryan would sit outside the outpost and watch the twin moons rise. The silence of the desert became his only companion. He thought about his home on Earth, a place he had not seen since he was a teenager. He wondered if humanity still remembered the soldiers who had crossed galaxies for the sake of friendship and survival. One night, as he worked on the transmitter, he found old voice logs stored in its memory. He played the first one. A man's tired voice came through the speaker. "This is Captain Rowe from Outpost 7. The swarm pushed us back again. We're low on power, but the human Carath line is holding. If anyone finds this message, remember why we came here. We fight so that others can live." Ryan sat quietly listening to the message. The voice sounded like someone who had already accepted his fate but still chose to record hope. There were several more messages, stories of courage, loss, and dreams of peace. The last one was different. It was from a woman with a calm, gentle tone. "If this outpost is ever found, remember that even when it feels hopeless, a single life can make a difference. Keep the light alive." The words touched him deeply. He looked at the transmitter and thought of sending his own message. Not for rescue, but maybe for memory. A reminder that humanity had not given up. He repaired the antenna and set it to send a repeating signal across nearby frequencies. The signal was weak, but it carried one line of text. "This is Human Outpost Delta, still standing." Still human. He didn't expect anyone to answer. Still, sending it felt right. Meanwhile, far away at the Carath base, Lyra sat in her command tent staring at the empty spot where Ryan's armor once rested. She had ordered it moved to storage, but every time she saw the mark it left on the ground, her chest tightened. She told herself she had done the right thing. She had followed the rules. A commander must be strict. A commander cannot let emotion cloud judgment. Yet the soldiers were different now. They whispered about Ryan, the human who walked away after saving them all. Some said he had died in the desert. Others said he had found a way to survive. The Carath troops began to act differently. Some questioned orders. Some hesitated in battle. They had lost not only a soldier, but a symbol. Lyra tried to focus on reports, but her mind wandered. She remembered the look in Ryan's eyes before he left. Tired, disappointed, yet strangely calm. She remembered his quiet courage, the way he never boasted or demanded praise. She realized that in her anger she had mistaken his selflessness for pride. That night, one of her officers, a young Carath named Tevin, entered the tent. "Commander, there is something you should see," he said. Lyra followed him to the communication room. The technicians had detected a weak transmission from the desert region. The signal was old, but the language was human. Tevin adjusted the console. "It's repeating the same message every 30 seconds. It says Human Outpost Delta still standing." "Still human." Lyra's heart skipped.
"Can you locate the source?"
"Approximately," Tevin said. "It's in the old eastern zone, near the ruins of Outpost 7. Lyra turned to him. "That's where he went." Tevin hesitated. "Commander, we do not have orders to send a team there. The swarm activity is high in that area. It's dangerous." Lyra looked at the map on the wall. The region was indeed marked as unstable, but something inside her refused to ignore the signal. "Prepare a small scout team," she said quietly. "We leave at dawn." Tevin's eyes widened. "You plan to go yourself?" "Yes," she replied firmly. "I gave an order that drove a man into the desert. I will see where it led him." The next morning, under a gray sky, a small Carath transport lifted off from the base and headed east. Back in the desert, Ryan had no idea anyone was coming. He spent his mornings repairing the outpost systems and his nights watching the horizon. One evening, while checking the power lines, he noticed something strange. Small flickers of light on the far ridge. Not natural lightning, but blue energy sparks. At first he thought it might be the swarm returning. But then he saw the pattern. It was a controlled formation moving cautiously. Military. He quickly turned off the transmitter and hid behind a broken wall, watching through the cracks. As the lights drew closer, he saw the smooth shapes of Kareth scout drones. He sighed. Of course, he whispered. They finally noticed. The transport landed near the outpost. Dust rose into the air. Lyra stepped out first, wearing her silver battle suit. Her eyes scanned the ruins. "Ryan," she called, her voice echoing through the empty site. There was no answer. Her team spread out, scanning the area. One of them found the transmitter still warm. "Someone was here recently," Tevan said. Then they heard a voice behind them. "Looking for someone?" Lyra turned. Ryan stood a few meters away, dressed in torn clothes and a makeshift cloak, his face tanned from the sun. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried both weariness and strength. Lyra stepped forward slowly. "You are alive?" "Disappointed?" Ryan asked quietly. "No," she said after a pause. Relieved, the two stood facing each other in silence. The wind moved the sand between them. Finally, Lyra spoke again. "I heard your signal. You found this place." Ryan nodded. "It was broken. I fixed it. Someone had to." Lyra looked around. "Why stay here?" "You could have come back." Ryan shook his head. "There's nothing left for me at the base. Out here I can still do something. The swarm moves using signal frequencies. These old systems can interfere with their network." "I've been testing it," Lyra frowned. "You have been alone here doing this?" "Someone has to try," Ryan said. "It's better than doing nothing." Lyra wanted to speak, but no words came. For the first time she saw him not as a reckless soldier, but as a man trying to bring meaning to a broken world. Before she could reply, one of her scouts shouted, "Commander, incoming movement from the west." "Multiple swarm signals." Ryan looked at the horizon. Black shapes moved through the dust, hundreds of them. The swarm had found the outpost. Lyra turned to her team. "Get back to the ship, now." Ryan grabbed a control lever. "No, if you leave now, they'll track you. We can use the outpost's power core to create a pulse, block their network. It might stop them from spreading." Lyra looked at him, torn between orders and instinct. "Trust me," Ryan said. "Just once." For the first time, Lyra nodded. "Then let's fight." As the swarm closed in, the two stood side by side once more, ready to face what was coming. The desert around the outpost became a battlefield once again. The horizon glowed faintly as the swarm advanced. The black metal bodies moved like a living storm, endless and silent. The sound of their movement was a low hum that made the ground tremble. Ryan stood beside the main control console of the old human outpost. His hands worked quickly, connecting cables and rerouting power. Sparks flew as he forced old machines to awaken after years of sleep. The flickering lights inside the control room grew brighter. Lyra watched him with her helmet off. The heat of the desert made her skin shine, but her focus never left him. She could see the determination in his face. Even after all that had happened, he moved with purpose. "How many are coming?" Ryan asked without looking up. Tevan, the young Kareth officer, checked his scanner. "At least 3,000 swarm units. They move in 3 groups. 1 from the west, 2 from the south. They will be here in less than 20 minutes. Ryan nodded slowly. "Then we don't have much time." Lyra walked closer. "You said you can use the outpost's power to block their signal." "How?" Ryan pointed at the old antenna tower outside. "The swarm communicates through a high frequency. It keeps them connected. If we overload the main core, we can send a pulse strong enough to cut that link for a short time. It won't destroy them, but it will stop their movement. Maybe long enough for us to escape or for someone to notice the signal." Lyra frowned. "It could kill you." Ryan smiled faintly. "That's not the worst thing I've faced." The wind outside began to howl as the swarm drew closer. Lyra gave quick orders to her soldiers to set up a defense perimeter around the outpost. Energy barriers rose from the ground and turrets powered up with blue light. Ryan checked the controls again. The power core was unstable, but it still held a charge. He looked at the small patch of the Earth symbol he had placed on the console earlier. For a moment, he felt a quiet sense of connection to the people who had built this place. They had believed in peace, not endless war. He wanted to honor that belief. Lyra came beside him again. "Ryan, when this is over, come back with us. We can explain everything to command. They will understand." Ryan shook his head. "No, they won't. They already made up their minds about humans a long time ago. I'm not doing this for them." She looked at him closely. "Then why?" Ryan looked out through the cracked window at the desert. "Because I still believe someone has to stand for something. If we stop fighting for what's right, then we're no better than the machines out there. Lyra had no reply. She had spent years believing that logic and order guided every action. But here, facing death beside a man she had once insulted, she began to see something else, something her kind had forgotten. The hum of the swarm grew louder. The first wave appeared on the ridge, black shapes with red lights glowing like eyes. The air filled with the sound of metal crawling and grinding. Positions, Lyra shouted. The Kareth soldiers took cover behind the barriers. Ryan ran outside, grabbed a plasma rifle from one of the fallen crates, and took his position near the entrance. The first blast came fast, red energy bolts slicing through the sand. The outpost shields flickered under the pressure. Ryan fired back, hitting one machine square in the chest. It exploded into shards, but for each one destroyed, 10 more appeared. Tevin yelled, "They are trying to circle us." "Hold the line," Lyra ordered. Ryan saw 2 Kareth soldiers pinned under falling debris. He ran toward them through the smoke, dragging one out and pulling the other free. His armor was gone and every hit of sand and metal cut into his skin, but he didn't slow down. The swarm pressed closer. Their red lights glowed brighter as they crawled over the dunes. The sound was like 1,000 claws scraping metal. Inside the outpost, the old machines hummed louder as the power core charged. The lights flickered across the walls. Ryan ran back to the control room. "The pulse is almost ready," he shouted. Lyra followed him inside. "How long before it fires?" 2 minutes, he said. "But it needs someone to stay here and control the release. The core is unstable. If it overloads too early, it could blow the whole place apart." Lyra stepped forward. "Then I will stay." Ryan turned sharply. "No, I started this." "I'll finish it." Lyra met his eyes. "I gave you orders that broke you. I cannot stand by while you die for them." Ryan paused. For the first time, there was no anger between them. Only quiet understanding. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly. "Just make sure this signal reaches someone." Outside, the sound of explosions shook the ground. The swarm had reached the barriers. The Kareth soldiers fought bravely, but they were being pushed back. Ryan adjusted the controls and looked at the energy readings. The pulse would be strong enough to cut swarm communications for miles. It might even draw attention from orbit. He smiled slightly. "Let's give them something to remember." He turned to Lyra. "When I trigger the pulse, take your team and run for the ship. The blast might knock out your systems for a few seconds, but you'll be alive." Lyra clenched her fists. "And you?" Ryan looked at the glowing energy core. "I'll be right behind you." Lyra knew he was lying, but she didn't argue. Sometimes words only got in the way. She gave him a long look, then nodded and ran back outside to lead her soldiers. Ryan focused on the controls. The screens blinked red warnings, but he ignored them. The hum of the power core became a roar. Heat filled the room. He felt sweat on his face and smoke in his lungs. His fingers moved across the switches with calm precision. Through the cracked window, he could see the swarm closing in. Their metal bodies glistened under the sunlight. He took a deep breath and whispered quietly to himself, "For Earth, for all of us." He pressed the final key. Outside, the antenna tower blazed with light. A massive wave of energy burst from the outpost, spreading across the desert in a wide circle. The pulse hit the swarm like an invisible hammer. One by one, the machines froze, their red lights flickering and dying. The sound of their movement stopped. The silence that followed was almost shocking. The Kareth soldiers stood still, looking around in disbelief. Thousands of enemy units lay motionless in the sand. Lyra turned toward the outpost, her heart pounding. "Ryan?" She called through the comms. There was no answer. She ran back toward the control room. Smoke poured from the entrance. Inside, sparks flew from the walls. The consoles were destroyed. The air smelled of burned metal. She found Ryan lying near the control panel, his clothes torn, his arm covered in ash. He was alive, but barely conscious. His breathing was slow and his skin was pale. Lyra knelt beside him, shaking his shoulder gently. "Ryan, wake up." He opened his eyes slightly and smiled weakly. "Did it work?" "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "You did it." He looked at her, then at the broken machines around them. "Good," he whispered. "Then maybe it wasn't for nothing." Lyra helped him up, putting his arm over her shoulder. "We're leaving. The swarm is down, but not forever." Together they walked out into the sunlight. The wind carried fine dust over the still bodies of the machines. The world felt strangely peaceful, almost quiet enough to forget the war. As they reached the transport, Tevin ran to help. "Commander, the human fleet has received our signal. They're sending support ships." The pulse reached orbit. Lyra looked at the sky where faint trails of ships were already descending. She turned to Ryan. "They heard you." Ryan smiled faintly. "Took them long enough." When the transport lifted off, Ryan looked down through the window. The desert stretched endlessly, filled with silent machines and glowing sand. The outpost stood at the center, its antenna broken but proud. He whispered quietly, "Rest now." Lyra glanced at him, hearing the soft tone in his voice. She knew he was not speaking to himself, but to all who had fallen before him, humans and Kareth alike. As the ship rose higher, the first rays of dawn broke across the land, painting the ruins in gold. It was the first sunrise in years that felt like hope. Ryan closed his eyes, his head resting against the seat. For the first time since the war began, he allowed himself to rest. Lyra looked out at the horizon, her mind quiet. She thought of the words she had once spoken to him in anger and how wrong they had been. Humans did not fight for attention. They fought because something inside them refused to give up. Even when logic said they should, she turned to Tevin and said softly, "He showed us what strength really means." The young officer nodded, his eyes wide with respect. As the transport disappeared into the clouds, the silent desert below seemed to whisper back the same words Ryan had once sent into the void. Still standing, still human. The transport carrying Ryan and Lyra rose higher into the sky. Below them, the desert stretched endlessly, its dunes glowing golden under the morning sun. The silence inside the cabin was heavy. Ryan leaned back in his seat, his eyes closed, trying to gather strength for what lay ahead. His clothes were scorched, his arms scraped, and his face streaked with ash, but his mind was calm. Lyra sat beside him, watching quietly. She did not speak at first. She remembered the first time she had met Ryan years ago, when humans and Kareth first joined forces. Back then he had been reckless, bold, and sometimes frustratingly stubborn. But he had always been brave, always ready to face danger without hesitation. Today, after all that had happened, she saw a different kind of strength in him, quiet, steady, and unyielding. Finally, she broke the silence. "The fleet is moving to secure the eastern zones. Your actions, they gave them time." Ryan opened his eyes and looked at her. It wasn't enough. "The swarm will return. This world isn't safe yet," Lyra sighed. "We can't be everywhere, but you showed everyone something important today. Even my soldiers. They saw what humans can do when they refuse to quit." Ryan smiled faintly. "That is something at least." The ship descended into the fleet orbiting Varney. Humans in small shuttles came alongside the transport, landing smoothly on the command deck. Soldiers and medics rushed to Ryan's side, checking his injuries. Lyra stayed close, silently observing the human rituals of care and efficiency. She had fought alongside humans many times, but seeing them work together, protect each other, and yet maintain calm under pressure reminded her of their enduring spirit. One of the medics, a young woman with dark hair and steady hands, looked at Ryan's scraped arms and face. "You are lucky to be alive," she said softly. Ryan shrugged. "I was just in the right place at the right time." The medic smiled gently. "Humans never think they are heroes, but they are. You are proof of that." After the medical check, Ryan walked with Lyra to the fleet's observation deck. From there, the desert world looked almost peaceful. The destroyed outpost lay far below, surrounded by frozen remnants of the swarm. For the first time in days, Ryan felt a sense of accomplishment. Lyra's voice broke his thoughts. "There will be others who will try to take your place, but none will match your courage today." Ryan looked at her. "And yet it was your mistake that drove me here." Lyra's eyes softened. "I was wrong to speak as I did. My pride blinded me to your true intentions. I said cruel words to someone who risked everything for us. I cannot take back what I said, but I can try to make it right now." Ryan nodded slowly. He did not say anything, but the weight of her apology was clear. They both understood that action spoke louder than words. Meanwhile, the Kareth fleet worked with the human fleet to repair defenses along the eastern zones. Reports came in quickly. The swarm had been delayed, their network disrupted by Ryan's pulse. Many of their planned attacks had been thrown into chaos. The news traveled through both fleets. Soldiers and officers whispered about the human who had walked away, yet returned to save countless lives. Ryan's name spread fast, not as a hero in stories, but as a living example of what courage truly meant. A week later, Ryan and Lyra returned to the battlefield, not as soldiers, but as leaders. The swarm had reorganized, but the defenses were stronger, coordinated by the human fleet and the Carath together. Ryan led small teams, showing them techniques that could disrupt the swarm. Lyra followed his advice not because he was human, but because his experience and insight had proven invaluable. On the fourth day, a new threat appeared. Swarm scouts moved quickly across the desert toward an old human settlement. Ryan and Lyra observed them from a high ridge. If they reach the settlement, they could destroy everything we've rebuilt, Ryan said. Lyra nodded. We stopped them. Together. The humans and Carath coordinated an ambush. Using the terrain and Ryan's knowledge of swarm behavior, they drew the machines into narrow canyons. Energy barriers blocked their paths, and heavy fire from Carath turrets slowed their advance. Ryan led the strike from the front, moving fast and precise, disrupting the swarm's network again with small pulses. Lyra watched as Ryan moved with a strange combination of calm and urgency. He did not boast. He did not seek praise.
He only acted.
It reminded her of the first battle she had seen him fight, and yet something had changed. He was no longer a soldier following orders blindly. He was a force guided by purpose. The swarm retreated, confused and fractured. For the first time in weeks, the desert lay quiet. The human settlement remained intact. The Carath soldiers cheered quietly, but Lyra remained thoughtful. She turned to Ryan. You were right. Sometimes one life can make all the difference. Ryan shook his head. It isn't about being right. It's about standing up when it matters. Later, in the command center of the fleet, Ryan was approached by senior officers. They wanted to offer him rank, medals, and recognition. Ryan listened politely but shook his head. I'm not here for that. I only want to help protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is enough. The officers exchanged glances, surprised by his humility. Lyra stood nearby, nodding silently. She knew that Ryan's choice to refuse glory was part of what made him extraordinary. Humans were not always disciplined, but their courage and dedication could move entire fleets. Days passed. Ryan helped coordinate defenses across multiple zones. He trained human and Carath soldiers together, showing them tactics that were simple but effective. His methods were not flashy, but they worked. The swarm learned to fear the areas he protected. Stories began to spread about the human who had walked away yet returned to save thousands. One evening, as Ryan walked along the fleet's observation deck, Lyra joined him. The twin moons of Varnus shone brightly, reflecting off the metal surfaces of ships. Do you ever regret walking away? She asked softly. Ryan considered her question. No, he said finally. Walking away gave me time to see things clearly. I understood what I was fighting for, and I found ways to protect people without waiting for orders or praise. Lyra nodded. I misunderstood you before. I judged you by rules and protocol, not by heart. Ryan smiled faintly. You are not alone in that. Many do the same. A soft wind passed over the deck. The fleet below was quiet, preparing for the next mission. Ryan looked at the distant desert, thinking of the small outpost he had left behind. It had been abandoned, yet it had become a place of strategy, a center of hope. He had taken nothing from it, yet it had given him the chance to act when others could not. You know, Lyra said after a pause. When your pulse went out, I thought I had lost you forever, but you survived. You made it back. You showed everyone what humans are capable of. Ryan nodded, looking at the horizon. We all have the same choice. Stand or give up. I chose to stand. Lyra remained silent, reflecting on his words. The fleet was quiet, the stars above endless. She thought of how much she had learned from this human, how much the Carath could learn from his courage. Ryan turned to her, a serious look in his eyes. I do not fight for glory or medals. I fight so that others can live. That is all that matters. Lyra studied him. She understood then that humanity was not about the rules, not about orders or structure. It was about spirit, endurance, and heart. One human could inspire armies and turn the tide of war, not with machines but with willpower. That night, the fleet rested. Ryan remained awake for a while, watching the stars. He thought about the desert, the outpost, and the soldiers who had survived because of his choices. There was pain, there was loss, but there was hope too. and hope he knew could never be defeated. Lyra came to stand beside him silently. Together they watched the moons rise over Varnus, a quiet moment of peace before the battles that would surely come. For the first time, both Human and Kareth understood each other better. Words had failed before, but actions had spoken loudly. Ryan's quiet strength, his refusal to give up even when all seemed lost, had changed the course of the war. And Lyra knew deep in her heart that this human was not just a soldier. He was a symbol of hope, courage, and the enduring spirit of humanity. The desert below remained silent and still, but the world above had begun to remember the power of a human who refused to surrender. And Ryan, though tired, ready, and quiet, had already begun to prepare for the next challenge. The human fleet settled into orbit above Varnus. The desert below had been quiet for weeks, a calm after storms of metal and fire. Ryan walked slowly along the observation deck of the flagship. His body ached, his clothes were worn, and his hands still carried scratches from the battle. Yet his eyes were calm, watching the world below as if he could see both past and future. Lyra followed him, her steps quiet. She had spent the past weeks observing him closely. She had seen him guide fleets, train soldiers, and repair outposts with patience and determination. But more than that, she had seen the way humans inspired one another. Ryan did not demand respect. He earned it through actions that no one could ignore. The command center buzzed with activity. Reports of scattered swarm units continued to arrive. The fleet's coordinated movements blocking and dismantling small pockets of machines. Ryan had suggested new tactics relying not on overwhelming firepower, but on strategy and endurance. It was a different kind of war, one that required patience and intelligence, but it was also the type that humans excelled at. A Kareth officer approached Lyra quietly. "Commander, Ryan's actions have inspired both human and Kareth forces. Soldiers now ask about him first, not orders. They want to know how he would approach the mission." Lyra nodded. She had noticed it herself. Ryan's influence was subtle but undeniable. Humans and Kareth alike had begun to work together in ways they never had before. They trusted one another, not only because of plans and rules, but because they saw courage in action. Ryan turned to Lyra. "The swarm is learning," he said calmly. "They are scattered for now, but they will regroup. We need to be ready." Lyra watched him closely. "And will you lead the strike?" Ryan shook his head. "I don't need to. Others can do it now. My job is to make sure everyone knows how to fight, how to survive. That is enough." The next day, Ryan led a team of mixed human and Kareth soldiers to one of the eastern zones. There, small swarm units had begun reorganizing. The humans moved quickly, setting up small energy barriers and traps. The Kareth observed and learned, following his directions carefully. The swarm approached, 36 units moving with their usual precision. Ryan stood calmly behind a barrier, observing. He raised his hand, signaling his team. At once the barriers glowed and hidden traps activated. The swarm was slowed, forced to stop and retreat, unable to adapt to the combination of strategy and timing. Lyra watched from a nearby ridge, her mind reflecting on all that had happened. She remembered the moment she had spoken cruelly to him, when she had doubted his courage and purpose, and now she saw clearly that humans were not driven by pride, but by a sense of duty and heart. Ryan was proof of that. After the swarm retreated, Ryan helped his team repair their defenses and reinforce the perimeter. He moved among the soldiers, offering advice, encouragement, and quiet reassurance. There were no cheers, no medals, but the people he guided left with a sense of confidence that had not existed before. That night, the fleet gathered for a report. The commanding officers of both human and Kareth forces spoke of strategy, logistics, and future movements. But all attention turned to Ryan when he entered. He did not raise his head proudly, nor did he speak of his own achievements. He only shared practical advice and tactical suggestions. After the meeting, Lyra approached him quietly. "You could take credit for all of this, you know. The fleet would follow you anywhere." Ryan smiled faintly. "I am not a leader by choice. I am a soldier by nature. My duty is to help, not to be worshipped." Lyra shook her head. "Then let me speak for you. You deserve to be recognized." Ryan laughed softly. "Recognition does not win battles. Actions do. That is enough for me." Days turned into weeks. The swarm became less organized, unable to recover from the repeated human strategies. Villages, outposts, and settlements slowly returned to life. Farmers went back to their fields. Engineers repaired old machines, and children returned to streets that had once been filled with fear. Ryan traveled with small teams, teaching, repairing, and protecting. Everywhere he went, the presence of a human who refused to quit inspired courage. One evening, Ryan stood on the observation deck looking down at a rebuilt outpost. The twin moons rose in the sky, casting silver light across the desert. Lyra joined him, carrying 2 cups of warm tea. She handed one to him silently. Ryan accepted it and took a sip, eyes still on the horizon. "I never imagined this world could recover," he said softly. Lyra stood beside him, quiet for a moment. "Neither did I, but humans have a way of making the impossible seem possible." Ryan smiled faintly. "It is not humans alone. It is those willing to stand, to protect, to try even when everything seems lost." Lyra looked at him. "You taught us all that lesson. You have changed this alliance, this world, in ways that words cannot describe." Ryan shook his head. "I only did what anyone would do if they had the chance. But Lyra knew better. Not everyone would have walked away from everything, survived alone, and returned to protect others without asking for recognition. Ryan had done what few could do, inspire hope when hope seemed impossible." Weeks later, the fleet returned to the main human Kareth command station. Ryan's armor, battered and dented, was displayed in the Hall of Peace. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder of courage, endurance, and the spirit that could not be broken. Lyra stood before it, quietly touching the metal with her fingers. A plaque beneath the armor read, "He set down his armor not in defeat, but to teach us what it means to stand." Ryan stood a few steps back, silent. He did not seek attention, and he did not need it. Around him, humans and Kareth alike paused to reflect, to understand the lesson of his courage. The fleet had learned something important. Machines could be destroyed, but spirit could not be. Fear could be resisted, and even in the darkest moments, hope could shine through the actions of a single determined individual. Lyra approached Ryan once more. "What will you do now?" she asked. Ryan looked at her and then at the bustling command station. "I will continue to protect. I will continue to teach. I will make sure that no one forgets that one life, one choice can make a difference." Lyra nodded, a smile touching her lips. "Then the world is safer because of you," he shook his head. "Not because of me alone. Because people are willing to stand together. That is the true power of humanity." The sun set over Varnus, casting long shadows across the desert and fleets. The machines were silent, scattered, and defeated. But more importantly, a story had begun to spread, of a human who set down his armor, walked away from the war he had fought for years, and returned not for glory, but to remind the universe of the strength, courage, and heart of humanity. Children in the settlements whispered his name, soldiers in the fleet spoke of his bravery, and even Kareth commanders told stories of his endurance. Ryan had become more than a soldier. He had become a symbol of hope, courage, and the enduring spirit of a species that refused to be broken. And as the moons of Varnus rose high in the sky, Ryan stood quietly on the observation deck. The war had not ended, but the world had learned something greater. Humanity, when it chooses to rise, cannot be defeated. Not by machines, not by fear, not even by doubt. Lyra joined him, and together they watched the light of a new dawn spread across the planet. The story of the human who walked away and returned had been told, but its meaning would last far longer, as long as people remembered what it meant to stand, even when the world said to fall. Ryan's quiet strength, humility, and courage had left a mark that no war could erase. His armor rested in the Hall of Peace, but the real legacy lived in the hearts of all who had seen him act. All who had followed his lead, and all who understood that even one person, when guided by purpose, could change the fate of worlds. And so, the human who set down his armor did not disappear. He continued to walk among humans in Kareth, a living reminder that courage and heart were the greatest weapons of all. The universe had learned a lesson. Humanity was not only strong in body, but stronger in spirit. And in that strength, the stars themselves seemed to shine a little brighter.